The first thing I want you to know is why I am here, how it happens that I'm here, aside from the fact that Gavin invited me to come teach here beginning in 2003, and I've been here every year. And he's been, you know, Gavin was a great encourager of my research and my work. So look, I was an investigative journalist full-time for about 20 years. Okay, around the year 2000, I took a sabbatical and went to work in a business school. I continued to teach investigative journalism. And I started to notice something, which was that half of my students couldn't get jobs. It had nothing to do with how good they were. This was the European average, as I discovered from a study by the European Journalism Center. Half. One day I was actually standing with the director of our program at the Université de Paris, where I taught at the Institut Français de Presse. And a student came up to me at our class fair every year because all the programs tried to recruit people. And a guy came up to me and said, if I take your program, do I get a job? I said, half of our students get jobs. It's an excellent journalism program. If you want to be a journalism, we'll give you a great education, but I can't guarantee you you'll get a job. He walked away, and the director of the program said to me, why did you tell him that? And I said, why? Isn't it true? And instead of not dealing with the situation, I thought, how do I deal with this situation? Okay, I can teach people to investigate. I know how to do that. I have a method for teaching them to investigate, which, by the way, we will be teaching here tomorrow. But shouldn't I be doing something more? I'm taking a couple of years out of people's lives here. Shouldn't I be doing something to get them further down the path? And that's when we started something at INSEAD, this business school where I work, called the Stakeholder Media Project. And we started exploring ways that people could do watchdog journalism without necessarily working for the mainstream media. Our perception, which was based on the studies we were seeing from the Pew Center and a number of other places, was that there was a secular decline going on in the audience for mainstream media. We didn't know what was behind that decline. I have a few answers that I'll share with you now, but this was one that we quickly ruled out. Okay, no, you know, I used to work for the Washington Post, okay, and you know, the word that came down from the editors at the Washington Post was KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Okay, well, we did such a good job of that, you know, we just kept saying one after the other that our competitors were stupid, and this is why people liked them, because they were so bad. Okay, so the internet is stupid. Fox News makes you stupid. Oh, social media is making us stupid. Well, I don't believe that. I can't accept that. Especially because we were starting to look stupid too. Our value proposition, concept we talk about a lot in business school, is that we're supposed to be giving people information on which they can rely to make their lives better, to make them more powerful. For me, journalism is always about power. It's about getting it, using it, finding other people who are going to move you along. And regardless of the news organization of the source, about 60 people only believe some of what they're getting from us. The people who really believe in what we're saying are less than 18%. This is for the US, of course, but I could show you equivalent figures for France and the UK. You know, since our value proposition is to tell people stuff that they can believe, obviously there's a problem there. This began before Donald Trump. If you look at the figures from 2002 to 2012, there was a great drop. Now, we can talk about what caused these figures. I have my own theory. I think the two successive financial crises in less than 10 years, which the news industry did not warn people about, and which led to the loss of their retirements and their homes, major investments in any life, maybe discouraged people from thinking that we knew what we were talking about. Maybe. You know, the idea that the news industry did a bad job with these crises is not Mark Hunter's opinion. It's, you know, been documented by a number of scientific studies. Incidentally, the stuff I'm going to be showing you today is based on peer reviewed research, as well as you know, classic investigative type work. I mean, I'm trying to make sure that what we say to people is not sending them down the road to ruin simply for the sake of saying something novel. Okay. And now I want to change the mood here a little bit, okay, to go back to something Luuk Sengers said when he took over IBM in the 1990s. He had an American industrial giant on his hands that was going down fast. It was the Titanic, it had hit the iceberg. And the first thing Gerstner said to his people was this: the reason we are failing is not that God turned against us. Therefore, we can turn this around. We can actually do something about our situation instead of saying people are stupid, or, you know, the gods don't want us, or whatever you want to say. He turned IBM around, and I don't think our challenge is greater than the one he hit. Here is one road out, but it's a very wide road, and it's a road that has been there since the beginning of the internet, and it's still getting wider. To get onto it, we have to change our notion of the news user somewhat. We have to see them as stakeholders. Okay, so what is a stakeholder? Is there anybody here who does not know that word? Everybody knows what a stakeholder is. Okay, then let's agree on this definition. They're people who can affect or be affected by the activities of an organization. That definition comes from Ed Freeman, who's the inventor of stakeholder theory. Freeman also noted that a stakeholder is someone without whom your organization cannot survive. That's a pretty useful definition for us as well. We need these people to survive. Okay. Now, when we started looking at people who use news as stakeholders, we started noticing a couple of things that didn't fit with what we learned in journalism school about why people use the news. Okay? The theory on which we were all educated, I don't know about you, but I certainly was that we give people information so that they can make decisions. Okay? The information they're asking for is not just about decisions, it's about values. It's about what they think is important. Okay? It's not just data of some particular kind. I have great respect for data. This is about the meaning in data, about what it says about who you are and what you want. And it's about your community's self-interest. It's very much about winning. Okay? Now, we're going to be talking about this more in the course of this discussion, and I expect challenge from you on it. I'm not saying that you have to like everything that I'm going to be telling you, but I'd like you to think about it with me, if you will. Okay? These two elements are key definitions of stakeholder-driven media. Now, where we're about to go is into a space where people are building media that are targeted towards stakeholder groups. Some of them can be very, very big. Greenpeace has 3 million paying members, and that's the core audience for its news network. Some of them can be very, very small, but that doesn't stop them from being influential. The stakeholder-driven media that took down Volkswagen has 20 members. Okay, the International Council on Clean Transportation. We're talking about power, and power is not always a function of numbers and mass. Okay? Right. This is where I can find the beginnings of the phenomenon, at least in the contemporary era. There's a woman named Sarah Diamond who wrote an incredible book called Roads to Dominion, where she mapped out the rise of Christian broadcasting and conservative media like direct mail in the 1970s. Okay? Well before Fox became a broadcasting power, these people had developed TV, radio, and print networks that addressed tens of millions of people in the United States, and which, by the way, remain the electoral base of the Republican Party there. Okay? I saw their influence in France in 1995 when I was writing an investigation of the French National Front, and I realized that they had their own media networks, and that those networks were incredibly effective. They could pull people out of the fog into their campaigns in the space of a morning by going on their own radio. They were shut out of mainstream media at the time. Greenpeace, in 1995, invaded the Brent Spar platform in the North Sea. They videoed it. That video went around the world on mainstream news networks. That year, in their annual report, they announced that they were becoming a media organization. 2 years ago, they announced that investigative journalism was going to be one of the 3 strategic pillars of the organization. We'll talk more about how they capitalize on that network, but think about Greenpeace as a media network. They are not just an activist organization. These guys were started by a member of Doctors Without Borders named Pierre Chirac, ferocious guy, great, courageous doctor. He was really, really something. And he began this website which tells people everything about drugs that the pharma industry does not tell you. They have been at the source of major scandals in France involving drugs that never should have gone on the market because the side effects were too strong. He is must-reading for everybody in France who wants to know what they are really giving to their patients. Can you imagine a mainstream medical journal doing this? Probably not, because the reasons are, well, what? Who pays for mainstream medical journals?
Labs.
Pardon me?
Labs.
Labs?
Medicinal labs. Pfizer and...
Yes,
Roche.
the labs, exactly. I mean, they're the advertising base. You know, that doesn't mean they tell them what to print or not, but it does make people cautious about what they print. And finally, there's Breitbart. You know, you can say what you like about Steve Bannon, but, you know, as a publisher, he spent 15 years exploring the alt-right networks that became the foundation for these people's circulation. And Breitbart himself, the founder, you know, was all over the map of the Tea Party. The Tea Party became the community on which he based their success. Now, I'm not going to show you the influence maps of Breitbart now, but these people became the core of like-minded media networks that actually played a decisive role in the 2016 election. It wasn't that Trump beat the media, it was that one media coalition beat another media coalition, and these were the core of the right-wing media coalition. So we're looking at a movement that now has 40 years of building behind it, and it's not done yet. Okay, the resources that are existing behind this movement are just unimaginably big. How many user forums do you think exist in the world at this moment? Okay, we got 6 billion people, about half of them are on the internet. How many user forums do you think they are? Communities of people on the internet who talk about matters of interest to them that reflect their values. How many do you think there are? Millions. How many millions? 600 million? Well, that's probably a little much, but it's quite a number. This is an incomplete list. This is just the number of communities that are based on the different software platforms that are available. Okay? I'm going to show you an example later of an activist group that built a media network on that to kick the butt of the Adidas company. Okay, force them to change their product policies. Okay, now this is where we get into a little bit of detail, okay? But I'm going to ask you to follow this with me, okay? MSM is mainstream media. SDM is stakeholder-driven media. We're talking about elements of a business model. And allow me to say this now. A business model is not a transaction. It's not how much money someone gives you to do something. It's a number of different elements. It's your customer. It's the channel you have to the customer. It's the cost structure that you have to work with. It's your value proposition to that customer. It's a whole bunch of elements. If you haven't got all those elements in place, the amount of money you're paid is almost irrelevant. Okay, because your costs may eat it up, it may not go to the right customer, et cetera. So this chart shows some of the elements from a business model. Now, mainstream media think they're for everyone. Okay? I mean, I've talked with guys from the BBC, we're for everyone. Okay, you're for everyone. Stakeholder-driven media are not for everyone. Okay? Greenpeace is not for everyone. Greenpeace is for people who have a particular view of the environment and its importance. The ethics of mainstream media are neutral. We're supposed to be arm's length, objective, fair. Okay. Stakeholder-driven media are not at all objective. They're transparent. They tell you what they think. Okay? You can see this by looking at the way any mainstream news organization treats the climate change issue. Okay? One of them will say, well, this scientist says this and this scientist says that. Then you look at grist.org, which is a stakeholder-driven media for the environmental movement, covers things that Greenpeace doesn't, has a big audience. And what they call climate change deniers is bullshit. That's the exact technical term they use. Okay? The language you see in stakeholder-driven media is far more ferocious than anything you'll see in mainstream media. Now, if you look at the scholarly literature on what makes audiences, how you get people to watch you, they'll say, this is a no-no, you can't do that. But they do it. How do they do that? How do they get away with it? Well, the key reason is they're not telling you what's important. The mainstream media say, we tell you what's important to know about and then you make up your mind. You do not go to greenpeace.org to find out that the environment matters. You are there because you know the environment matters. You go there because you want to know how to save the world. And that's what they're going to tell you. Did you know that every day Greenpeace runs a list of 10 things you can do to save the world? They do, in fact, just in case you were wondering. They'll tell you that every day. Every stakeholder-driven media has an agenda. They tell you what they want, how they plan to get it. Breitbart does that too. Breitbart tells you what they want and how they're going to get it. This is a dominant characteristic of these media. And finally, I'm going to circle back to the time focus because it's of direct relevance to what we're doing here with investigative journalism. Okay, the time focus of mainstream media is today. We all know this. Okay, one of the big problems we have with investigations is the story that comes out and then another story takes its place. Stakeholder-driven media have figured out a way to deal with this problem because they're dealing with a community that has limited concerns, okay, focused concerns, let's say. Because they're dealing with people who have focused concerns, they can come back and hit it every day. They're focused on the outcome. They're focused on the final result, not on what happened today, where it ends up in the future. And in order to get there, one of the standard things they do is go into the past of the adversary to figure out their modus operandi, their history, their character, and how they are going to beat them. I will give you an example of this from our research that absolutely blew my mind, okay? We were looking at how Greenpeace and a few other stakeholder groups beat BP plc, the second biggest oil firm in the world at the time and the biggest listed firm in the UK. They beat them in Alaska, set them up for the disaster of Deepwater Horizon, laid the groundwork for the coalition that humbled that mighty vessel. Okay? And one of the things we looked at was an incident that had occurred in 1995, okay? Because at the time BP said we're beyond petroleum, we're a friendlier, better oil company. I think a lot of people in the company met it. I worked with them around the time, I'm not ashamed of it. And in 1995, in Colombia, a Colombian Army brigade that was guarding a BP installation went rogue, wiped out a village, took it off the map. By 2001, according to the Factiva database, the mainstream media had ceased to mention that incident. We found one reference to it in a Financial Times profile of John Brown, the CEO of the company. One. We found 37,000 mentions on the internet. Okay, human rights groups, different researchers, a complete list of every human rights violation where BP was considered to be implicated. 37,000 looking at the past, one looking at the present. Okay, that was the split. These are parallel worlds. Now, why I think this is great for investigation is because being an investigative reporter, I feel confident in saying this, one of the things you do as an investigative reporter is you map the past of your adversary. You look at everything these people did, you make out a timeline where you slot in what happened and what's going to happen next. You guess what's going to happen next. This is what stakeholder-driven media do too. And that's one of the reasons that I'm not surprised that Greenpeace is going into the investigative business. They're already halfway there. You don't have to explain to them why you do this. They don't think it's irrelevant. They think, oh yes, this is what we do. Part of what's happening here is that we're shifting the focus of our work from a product called news, okay, a product that goes stale very fast, to a service. Okay, I'm not the only guy who's made this remark. Jeff Jarvis has picked up on it as well in different ways. But we are moving into a support function for our audiences as they try to make their lives better in hard times. And you know, this is not entirely unprecedented. Pete Hamill wrote a book called News as a Verb in the 1990s, where he pointed out that the function of the American mainstream newspaper had been to help immigrants become Americans and become prosperous. That was an incredibly important insight. Okay. We're in the same situation now. Our audiences have been in a state of crisis now, material, spiritual, democratic, for decades. And, you know, we've got to help them out of it. This is the way I feel about it. Our responsibility is to help them out of it. And you see stakeholder-driven media make this promise very explicitly. Quora is your best source for knowledge. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but that's the promise you're making. You go on Quora and you will find out anything you have to know. Incidentally, one of the things that these media are training audiences to expect is solutions to their problems. It's not just telling you, here's the information you can choose from. It's saying, this is the way out of your hole. Okay? The second thing, you know, this is positive news. Positive news, you know, gives you the, it's a London paper, a small newspaper that was redone a couple of years ago. Very, very interesting from all kinds of standpoints. Among other things, they gave up their offices and moved into a shared startup bin with a lot of people. They have one end of a table. It's a great place to have a newspaper as long as you're not dealing with confidential information. Okay. Xing is the German competitor to LinkedIn. You may have noticed that Microsoft bought LinkedIn recently for billions of dollars. Why? Well, Microsoft said we're going to be marketing our software to these people. That's not the only reason. It's a news agency. LinkedIn is a news agency. Xing is in a smaller, more confined market or community, if you will. And what they do is they organize events that tell their people how to prosper. They're giving them career coaching. They're creating professional sub-communities within this overarching thing that get people jobs and that, you know, make people aware of what the latest things are that are happening in their business. Forbes is trying to do the same thing, but in a more general way. Okay? So among the implications here, by the way, is that these new kinds of media are becoming direct competitors with us. They're not just stupid blogs for stupid people. They're becoming our competitors. And they're becoming channels to the people we want to reach. Okay? So what are they giving to people? Well, the first is they protect them. This is the High Country News. They've been around since the 1970s. Their slogan is for people who love the West, the American West. They're an environmental education nonprofit. They have an annual budget of $2.5 million. Half of it comes from commercial sources, advertising, events, etc. Okay, I talk about them in detail in the book, which is free, so I have no compunctions about telling you if you're interested in them, take a look at the book. Okay, I talked with them a lot. But High Country News is there to protect the West and its values. Now, it's incredible because that cuts across political lines. Okay, the beginnings of environmentalism in the United States were in the 1900s, the early 1900s, with Teddy Roosevelt, who was a Republican. Okay, there are a lot of people who care about the West, and they are telling them how to care about it, how to protect it. The second is to promote. You want the community to grow, to become more prosperous, more powerful, safer. Okay? I don't know how many of you have ever looked at the Patagonia.com website. These people are mind-blowing. They're an outdoor gear supplier that is a chief engine of environmental activism in the United States. They support a lot of people. They promote environmentally sound practices in their industry. They have always used media to bring their audience, their consumers with them as they move up the ladder of activism. They're now the center of a network of activists. And I looked at their website because I was actually looking at High Country News, which appeared on a list of the 10 best environmental blogs, and so did Patagonia. So I thought, what are they doing? I went to look at them and fell out of my chair. Okay? One of the founders of the company now holds the job of chief storyteller. His job is to tell people about the importance of the environment and how they can contribute through their consumer habits to making it better. Now, you can look at this cynically if you like, but I don't. You know, I think they're doing something interesting. Okay? Finally, one of the themes of this conference is false news. So I would like you to know that even though there are SDM like Breitbart or the Daily Mail, if you like, that have agendas we don't agree with and that can be sources of disinformation, God knows, there are also people who've understood the importance of real facts to winning. I want to tell you how we got onto this. I was investigating a boycott in France against the Danone company. Okay, it happened in 2001. I'd never seen a boycott like this in my life. The whole country rose up against this company. They were closing factories with French workers. You know, people hated them for that moment. And 6 months later, the head of the company gets up at the shareholder meeting and said, no effect on group sales. Nothing happened. I thought, how did they do that? So, you know, I went back to investigate, and I was thinking, well, he's telling the truth because, you know, he's on the stock market in the US. If he lies to his shareholders, he can get hit with a class action suit. Okay? Instead, it turned out that the people who supported him throughout the boycott, financial analysts, when they saw the real numbers inside the company, they turned on it overnight. The company's market value went down 30%. They were nearly taken over 5 times. French government finally passed a law that made casinos national security establishments. Okay, they owned a casino, so now they couldn't be taken over. Can you imagine? Okay. This story never appeared in the mainstream media. One of France's major industrial companies nearly went down the tubes, and the only people who reported it were financial analysts in their newsletters. People addressing the stakeholder community of investors, telling them, if you want to go poor, keep your Danone stock. Okay? So Michael Porter is a strategy guru at Harvard Business School. I really like his stuff. He says that information changes structures. Well, that's a fact. It brings some people into play who weren't there before. It changes the balance of power. It spawns new businesses, like the ones we're talking about now, the new firms that come forward to tell people stories that the mainstream media no longer have room for. And it creates competitive advantage, because if you know what really happened, you're the rich guy and somebody else takes the loss. It's incredible how many stakeholder-driven media there are in places where people make or lose money. This is a story, it's about crowdsourced investigation on one level, but it's also a story about power. In 2011, DuPont brought out this herbicide called Imprellis, okay, which was a miracle product. The people who take care of lawns all over the United States were thrilled with this. They're called lawn care operators. They have their own website, which is called lawnsite.com. The people on this website cannot spell. They can't write. Okay? I mean, they're small businessmen. You know, they have lists of their tractors and their different tools, but they can't spell or write correctly. But they know what happens when a product goes rogue. 6 weeks after they started applying this miracle product, trees started dying all over America. Then something very interesting had to happen. The first people who showed up on the forum saying, let's be friends, were the agricultural research centers who had approved this product. They said, we want data, we want partnerships, we're doing studies, let's talk. Now what that meant was that DuPont had just lost a critical support community. It moved over to the side of the lawn care operators. Then homeowners got involved, millions of homeowners. There was one thread on this site, on this forum they had, that had 2 million messages. A forum with 2 million messages, not 2 million page views, messages. Oh my God, I never saw that before, okay? Kept widening. Now the US Composting Council got into it because they hated products like Imprellis. Imprellis makes compost contaminated. You can't use the clippings, okay? So they jumped into the game, and finally the Environmental Protection Agency comes in, says to DuPont, oh, we'd like to look at all your research. DuPont said, we can't give you that, and the Environmental Agency said, yes you can. They got the stuff in the house. 2 weeks later, they banned the product, okay? DuPont lost $1.5 billion in damages, and the division that made this product was wiped off the map. It disappeared. They sold it to a competitor for peanuts. A bunch of guys who could not spell destroyed a unit of a multinational company. What? When was the last time one of us did that? We spell pretty good, but I haven't heard of us taking out too many companies. Okay. This is what it looks like when you put it on a system dynamics map. One of my partners is a woman named Maria Beziu, who's an expert in system dynamics. You're going to have a copy of this, okay? So don't worry about taking notes. If you want to photograph it, please do. But we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy. What this map basically tells you is that one stakeholder group smacks into another, and there is a reaction. And the information starts moving around. And when people find out the information is true, they start posing their own questions and putting pressure on the people who raised the questions in the first place. In this case, management. This map is based on 5 case studies of corporations in crises, where we found that little groups got big results. They destroyed a unit, they forced a change in corporate policy, they created big problems with regulators. This could be Volkswagen. This could be BP. BP is one of the companies we used. It's Nike. There are 3 things that help people win in these media. One is they're on the front lines. The guys at lawnsite.com could not spell, but they sure knew a lot about pesticides. They knew more about them than the company. They had something like 30 centuries of accumulated experience with these products. Okay? The depth of their expertise was unquestionable. The second is, you can't shut them down. I mean, on one level, that's so obvious that it's duh. But on another level, do you realize that for 50 years, the dominant paradigm of how we get social change is that somebody creates a demonstration, information, the mainstream media pick it up, and then it goes mainstream and people have to react. Well, that happens sometimes. That's what the Panama Papers did. Okay? But more often, we think what happens is that somebody has a voice who can't be shut up. They keep hammering on the thing, and a change results. Do you realize that for the first 20 years that the climate change movement existed, it wasn't in the mainstream media? That the wind power movement wasn't in the mainstream media? These were not stories. Nobody was following them. These people were following them. There's nothing like owning a story with long legs. And finally, the third advantage they have is that they don't go away. Okay? These stories are central to their identities and to their communities, to what their communities think is important, so they can stay in the fight. They don't drop it. They keep hitting on one thing. You know, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism is an example of this. You guys practically own the drone story now. You know, you're a central source for information about drone attacks everywhere in the world. You know, I've seen other people like that come through here. Who's that wonderful woman who was covering Chelsea Manning? She was here last year. Yeah. We'll remember her. She's mentioned in the book too. I mean, front lines, your own news channel, and sticking in the fight, and you win, or you have a better chance of winning. Now, one of the strange stories we came across as we were going through this was the fight of Vegetarians International Voice for Animals, also known as Viva. Yeah, it's a great name, isn't it? Viva, Vegetarians International Voice for Animals. In the late 1990s, their founder noticed kangaroo steaks for sale in a UK supermarket. She got interested in the subjects of kangaroos, okay, published a white paper in conjunction with Australian environmentalists, and then began a campaign against Adidas, who had a shoe called the Predator that was made out of kangaroo hide. Beckham was its endorser, okay? So they went after the shoe, they went after Beckham, and this became a transformational campaign for these people. It brought them an entire new level of visibility and activist support. They didn't even know how much. We were the ones who told them about it. We interviewed them and said, so how did you make contact with people all over the world in vegetarian forums? And they said, what forums? Okay. But they did. And they beat Adidas. When the Olympics came to London, Adidas pulled the shoe. They changed the leather. They were not going to go up against Viva on its home turf. They never mentioned Viva in the announcement. Viva said, we won. Viva was right. Took them 12 years, but they got a major industrial company to stop killing kangaroos for leather. Not bad. If I were a kangaroo, I'd be very happy about that. They also changed their own profile in the highly competitive world of vegetarian activists. It is very competitive, you know. No movement has been so well studied as animal rights. Okay, 3 assets we got out of this. One is publics. I'm going to talk to you a little more about how investigative journalism helps build those publics. The second is data. Data is worth a lot of money. Guess why Amazon is buying Whole Foods? Okay? And the third is a network. Network is influence. Networks are people who give you information or who listen to your information. It's not just an audience, okay? It's someone who can do something, can bring other resources into the fight. Stakeholder-driven media are designed to generate these 3 assets. Now, this is about network, okay? I realized at one point in my work, okay, that every time you do an investigative story, you put together a network, okay? In France, the idea of investigation is that you go to the people you went to school with. I didn't have that advantage there, so I had to put my own networks together. I've been there for 34 years now. This is one I did in the United States in 1995. It was the starting point for story-based inquiry, by the way. And one of the things that happened in doing this investigation was I realized that I was dealing with different components of a single community, a single village. That every time I called on one of these people, I was paying a visit to the vicar's wife or to the local cafe. You know, I was going into a place where people hung out with each other and knew each other. And when you do an investigation, like Viva did on kangaroos, you build a community like this. The only question is whether or not you will maintain that community as an asset or you will throw it away as something that's already been done, which is mainly what we do in the news business. We do an investigation, we build our community, and we throw it away. The Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project and ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, are two examples of how successful you become when you keep that community around you as you move forward through similar stories. Okay? What I'm saying here is that investigative journalism is an accelerator of stakeholder-driven media success because it brings you deep into your community very, very fast. And if you did a good job on the investigation, everybody in that village respects you. They may not love you, but they will respect you and they will pay attention to what you say. And the game is about influence and power. That's the end goal. We're doing this to change the world. At least that's why I'm doing it, and I assume it's why most of you are here too. We're not just doing it to chronicle our own decline or the horrors of the world. We're doing it to stop some things and make other things go. Okay? So here's where you find the people who will do that. Now, I've already said that a business model is not only about revenue, but it is also about revenue. So let's talk about where the revenue comes from to do these enterprises. Because one of their startling characteristics is that a lot of them make money. Okay? People will pay to support the mission of a stakeholder-driven media. The classic example is Greenpeace. This is one of their fundraising things from the Hong Kong website. You'll notice that they say, pay us and we will make your world less polluted. They say that they're going to do it with investigations that identify the sources. Isn't that amazing? You're going to pay us to do the work that nobody else is doing to expose these bastards. Wow, would you pay for that? Of course you would, if you cared about this. Who else is going to do that? I don't know. I don't know of any other NGO that makes quite that proposition. And the other is to access the community. These are the two main sources. Now, my favorite example of this is responsibleinvestor.com. Okay? There is a community in the business world that's focused on corporate social responsibility. I know about them because I work at the INSEAD Social Innovation Center. Don't laugh. We do think of it in terms of social innovation, but these guys are social innovation. What they did was they said, there's a bunch of people in the investment community who want their money to change the world. They are victims of charlatans. We can expose these charlatans. They are minority voices in their own organizations. Nobody's listening to them. We can give them ammunition to take back to the boss and say, this pays. We can bring them together so that they feel their strength through conferences, through different ways of having them communicate. This is what they do. So when I say you pay to access the community, you know, investment companies pay to, you know, to get to the people who are reading this publication. The readers pay to belong to that community and be part of it and get the information the community needs to thrive. And sponsors pay to come to the conferences to talk to these people. High Country News uses some of the same marketing strategy. These are marketing strategies, okay? One of the things that I like about stakeholder-driven media is they do actually think about marketing besides their missions, sometimes. Okay? I don't know if any of you know Devex, Development Executive. Any of you ever look at this? Well, if you were applying for development grants in the developing world, you would know Devex, because that's Job Central, Trend Central, Connection Central, where the people who are funding the projects, the people who are bidding on the projects, and the people who are carrying out the projects get together. They are incredibly successful at that. They were going to have a news agency a few years ago. They intended to be the Bloomberg of the development field. It didn't work out. Okay, I keep asking them why and they haven't told me yet. My guess is that they found the investment was, quite significant. And they monetized it through things like classified advertising. Okay, people say, oh, Craigslist killed classified advertising. Oh, really? Well, I go to Craigslist to buy an electric guitar. I don't do it to get a job in Tanzania. I say data can be monetized because nobody's really got it figured out yet. Amazon has got it figured out, okay? But some people are doing pretty good on it. This is my idol, Andrew Jennings. Andrew's the guy who brought down FIFA, okay? The way he did it was by creating a database. Andrew tracked big sports organizations across 30 years, collecting the data. They had no secrets once he knew everything about them. Most of what we call a secret is just something you haven't looked at closely, okay? And Andrew talks about how he structured his freelance career around the creation of this database and the big sports story, which was a story he knew would carry him for his entire career. He picked a big subject and built matchless resources on it. When the FBI went after FIFA, it was on the basis of the stuff he'd found. Ethical Consumer, you may not know them, but they have the world's biggest database of consumer boycotts. Imagine, okay, that's of interest to NGOs, it's of interest to corporates. They have a 12-person operation, last time I looked. Everybody in the shop can do everybody else's job. Nice little way of reducing your costs and making sure that, if somebody moves on, you don't have a problem. And in the meanwhile, they have this matchless asset that nobody else in the world has collected. And finally, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project is currently trying to figure out how they are going to create and monetize a database, the global database they're constructing on organized crime. Okay, it's a big, big issue. Their estimate is it's going to cost 20 million bucks. That's an expert estimate. Paul Radu from OCCRP is here, over the next couple of days.
Tomorrow.
Pardon me?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Okay, Paul is here tomorrow. The other thing is people are more likely to lend you their services, particularly legal services, which we all need, don't we, if they like your mission. You don't have to pay people as much or even at all if they think what you're doing is particularly important. And then another way communities lower your costs is because they save your time. Instead of looking for information, somebody in your community has it. Instead of finding the right person to do it, somebody in the community is that person. Much of the time, which is our single biggest cost, and the only resource we never get back, is wasted on searching for things. Communities lower search costs. Finally, they're great places to hang out. One of the reasons people want to be rich and famous is because they think it gives them a higher quality of people to hang out with. Well, some people, including me, would argue that it's a lot more fun to hang out with people who share your values and goals for the world. And serving a community is a great way to meet those people. And by the way, one of the sick things about our industry is we don't look at other industries. Okay? Everybody in every multinational company who has the opportunity calls somebody in another company and says, hi, we're not your competitors. Can I come by and see what you're doing? They go study how other people do business to see if there's anything that can help them. People say, sure, come on in. It actually does happen. So the Lego story is known to people who look at social media or who look at stakeholder relations. It's a very famous story and it's really interesting for us. You all know who Lego is, right? The toy company. Did everybody here play with Lego?
Yes.
Did you know they nearly went out of business in 1995? They were going straight down the tubes. They were being pushed out by Star Wars and other stuff. So while this is going on, some clever wonks in the company discovered that there were entire online communities where people were modifying the toys, modifying them, modding. Okay, modder communities. They said, we have to sue these bastards. They're taking away our business. We're going down the tubes, and they're destroying our intellectual property. And then somebody said, well, wait a minute. They're modding our toys? They love our toys so much that they're improving them? So instead, they recruited them. They made a whole user community that's global. They make events for them. They have ambassador status. Some of them get jobs with the company. Okay? They bring them in to introduce them to Lego engineers who talk to them about molding and the kind of things that plastic wonks love to know about. You know? And the company is still alive. These people saved the company. So there are various ambassador strategies we can adopt as well. We're not doing a very good job of it right now. Okay? This is one of the places we can develop. Here's some things we can do now. First of all, you can be working for these companies. There's absolutely no reason that a serious investigative journalist can't work with a stakeholder-driven media. Disclosure. I'm starting a project with Greenpeace at the end of this month. Okay? Second, you can deliver research to them. Okay? You may want to have a deal that says you have approval over how the research is used or whatever, but you can deliver research, data, etc. And finally, you can start your own. These things are cheap to start. You don't have to have a marketing campaign that's going to make you viral. You just have to find the community, get in, and start serving it. It doesn't take long, and you can get better as you go on condition that there isn't already an entrenched competitor, or at least not an entrenched competitor who's doing a bad job of serving people. Okay. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for sticking around and asking these questions. I really appreciate it. Okay.